Welcome back. If you're, like most architects, you're probably driven by things like tectonic expression, spatial organization,
Mm-hmm.
the sheer joy of seeing your design actually get built.
Mm-hmm. The creative side.
The creative side, exactly. But today, we're sort of putting down the pen and picking up the calculator.
The dreaded calculator.
Yeah, because we are going to try and crack the code on architectural firm finance.
Yeah.
We are moving past let's say, the glamour of that beautiful facade and really delving into the cold, hard numbers that determine whether your studio is, well, structurally sound.
It's the essential truth of the profession, isn't it? If you're getting ready for the practice management division of the architect registration exam, the ARE, the dreaded PCM, or, even if you just want to understand why your firm's principal keeps mentioning terms like break-even multiplier in every single quarterly meeting,
Right.
then this deep dive is absolutely for you. I mean, design is the mission, we get that, but finance is the engine, and if that engine fails, the mission just stops cold.
Exactly. So we've pulled a really comprehensive stack of sources today. We're going to be focusing specifically on an issue from the architectural records and professional practices of the services of KING-KAMBUF's architecture design studios.
A classic case study.
It's a classic, and it's all about practice management, or PCM. Specifically, we're looking at understanding overhead, utilization, and the net multiplier.
Different.
Our mission today is pretty straightforward. We're going to provide a firm dashboard reading primer, and we're focusing intensely on that triumvirate of key metrics, utilization, overhead, and the net multiplier.
And we really have to emphasize this. Getting this right is not about mastering some kind of advanced accounting. It's about defining your terms.
Okay.
I mean, understanding these three numbers is really the shortcut to knowing if your firm is structurally sound, if it's profitable, or if it's just busy. And before we can even calculate anything, we have to agree on which dollars and which hours belong in which financial bucket.
Ah, the buckets.
Yeah, the buckets, because that foundational distinction is precisely where profitability or, the devastating lack of it hides in plain sight.
Okay, let's unpack this foundational model first then. It's all based on one core idea, from what I can tell.
It is. The initial mental model is so critical here, and it's surprisingly simple. You have to view the architecture firm as a factory.
A factory, okay.
But as you said, the raw material isn't steel or concrete. It's staff time. The entire financial health of the firm, everything, flows from how effectively it converts the total hours you pay for, into revenue, into money collected.
That's the whole game.
That's the whole game in time-based professional services.
So we start with 100% of all staff time. That's the capacity we pay for, right?
Yeah.
The whole pie. And right away, that 100% gets divided into two really crucial categories of labor. Let's define those rigorously.
Okay, so this is the division of total staff time. First, you have the most critical bucket, direct labor. This is often just called project time. This is the productive engine of the firm. It's the time that is sellable. And what that means is it can be directly charged to a client project. This is the work, the hours, that directly generate the fee that ends up paying for everything else.
So we're talking about hours spent designing, drafting CDs, site visits for CA.
Exactly. Project team meetings focus specifically on the client's scope, all that good stuff.
Okay. And then the second bucket, indirect labor, which the source material very wisely labels overhead time.
Yeah, overhead time. This is all the work that, well, it has to happen to keep the machine running, but you can't bill it to a specific client. So the firm has to absorb and fund this time internally.
Then you have to recover those costs somehow.
You have to recover them through the fees generated by the direct labor. There's no other way.
So what are some specific examples of this indirect labor? This is where it gets tricky.
It does, and the examples are vital for accurate accounting. You've got your administrative duties, the time spent writing proposals or doing marketing and business development for projects you hope to win.
Hope being the key word there.
Hope is the key word, yeah. It also includes mandatory training, learning the new BIM software standards or something like that. And then the largest, most often misunderstood chunk of it all.
Let me guess.
PTO.
Paid time off. PTO, vacation time, sick leave, holidays. Because while you are paying your staff for that time, it's not generating a single dollar of project revenue. It's pure overhead from a financial standpoint.
Wait, let's pause right there on the total staff time definition, because this is where the nuance is so critical. If I'm, say, the administrative assistant who handles payroll or the firm's dedicated marketing director, do my paid hours count in that total labor denominator they use for calculating utilization?
Great question.
Or are we just talking about the technical staff, the architects and designers?
That's a really insightful distinction, and generally the most comprehensive definition of total labor for these financial metrics includes all hours paid for by the firm.
All of them. All of them. The administrative staff, the marketing director, they might have a utilization rate of 0 or, very close to it if their labor is defined as 100% indirect. But their hours are still part of the total labor cost the firm incurs.
And their salaries are a big chunk of the cost side.
It's a huge chunk. They contribute significantly to the indirect expense bucket. If you exclude them from total labor, what happens is you inflate the utilization rate of the technical staff. And that makes the firm look more efficient than its actual total employment cost structure suggests. It's a bit of a vanity metric at that point.
It makes perfect sense. It really highlights the importance of accounting for all human resources, not just the ones touching the drawings. Okay, so we've defined the hours. Now let's layer the dollars on top of them, starting with the cost side.
Right, the cost side. This includes all overhead or indirect expense. And this is a crucial bucket. These are all the costs the firm pays that are not direct project labor costs. This is your fixed infrastructure.
So the rent.
The office rent, the utilities, all those eye-wateringly expensive software subscriptions.
Which are often the single largest non-salary expense I've heard.
They absolutely are. Then you have liability and property insurance, salaries for the administrative and marketing staff we just talked about, recruiting costs. All of these are indirect. They support the whole operation, not one single project, and they must be recovered.
Okay, so that's the cost side. And then on the revenue side, we introduce this figure that becomes the numerator for our ultimate metric. Net operating revenue, or NOR.
NOR. This is the figure that actually pays the bills. It's the money that's left over to run the practice after we account for those pesky pass-throughs. NOR is the available revenue that has to cover the firm's direct labor, its massive indirect expense, the overhead, and hopefully, if there's anything left, a profit margin.
Okay, let's hammer this home then. The critical distinction, pass-throughs. The sources are crystal clear that ignoring this is the #1 way to completely corrupt your financial metrics.
It truly is. It's a common trap. Net operating revenue is calculated as gross revenue minus pass-throughs. So what are they?
Right.
They're costs that you bill to the client, but for which you are really just acting as a collecting agent. The money literally passes through the firm.
So the two big ones are consultant fees.
Yep. Structural, mechanical, civil, you name it. And the other is reimbursable expenses. Things like client travel costs, printing, filing fees that the client has explicitly agreed to cover.
Okay, let's talk about a tricky one. Internal reprographics. If my firm prints a massive set of documents in-house and we bill the client, say, $5,000 for that printing cost, is that $5,000 NOR or is it a pass-through?
That depends entirely on your contract definition and your accounting practices, and this is exactly the kind of nuance the professional exam just loves to test.
Of course it does.
So if the $5,000 covers your internal cost and includes a markup for your administrative time, then the cost of the paper and toner might be deducted as a pass-through, and the markup portion would be NOR. However, most firms just treat large internal costs like that as a component of their overall indirect expense, and the revenue you get from billing the client for it is just treated as part of the total project fee, which makes it NOR.
So what's the safe answer for the exam?
The safer, simpler definition for the exam environment is this. If it's a direct payment to an external consultant or vendor that you merely fronted like paying the structural engineer's invoice, it's a pass-through, and it must be subtracted from gross revenue to get to NOR.
So the initial framing of this entire deep dive, it really relies on you being able to correctly categorize everything. Is the salary for the person who files your permits indirect expense?
Yes.
Is the invoice from the mechanical engineer a pass-through? Yes. Get those foundational definitions right.
And the math follows. That's the structural foundation. If you misclassify even one large reimbursable, your net multiplier will be artificially inflated. And that leads to terrible pricing decisions on future projects because you think you're more profitable than you actually are.
Okay. With our buckets now clearly defined, let's dive into the three metrics themselves. We should probably start with the simplest, which is the operational measurement of staff time.
Let's do it.
Let's start with the utilization rate, the time engine.
Right.
The foundational question this metric answers is pretty simple. How much of our paid staff time is actually spent generating billable project work? It's a measure of efficiency, really, of your staff capacity.
And the formula is just as simple. Utilization rate equals direct labor, the billable hours divided by total labor, so all hours paid for, including that PTO and admin time.
Let's use that simple math example from the source material. If a project architect is paid for 40 hours in a week, and they spend 24 of those hours drawing details for the community clinic, and the remaining 16 hours are split between writing a proposal and taking some PTO. The calculation is just 24 divided by 40, which gives you a 60% utilization rate.
Okay, but here is where we need to elaborate for you listening. This isn't just a number on a page, it's a behavioral and planning metric. So what's a good utilization rate?
Right. What's the target?
For a technical staff member, like a project architect or a job captain, something like 75% to 85% is often considered very high performance. For the firm as a whole, typical targets fall somewhere between 55% and 65%.
So why isn't 100%?
Because 100% is impossible. It's a fantasy. That 35% to 40% of non-billable time is required for survival.
It's the marketing.
It's marketing, it's administration, it's training, it's the holiday party, it's everything that keeps the firm running.
So if a firm's utilization rate starts to creep up, say, towards 80% firm-wide, that's actually a red flag.
It can be a huge red flag. It probably indicates that your staff is skipping essential non-billable tasks. They might be deferring professional development, rushing through internal QC checks, or, and this is a big one, working significant amounts of unrecorded overtime.
Which leads to errors, rework.
And burnout, critically staff burnout. High utilization can absolutely be a sign of a dangerously overloaded firm.
That's a great insight. You see high utilization, and you think it's a sign of management excellence, but it might just be staff exhaustion. But let me challenge that a bit. What about the roles we discussed earlier? If I'm the firm's dedicated non-billing marketing director, is my utilization rate 0? And if so, does that hurt the firm's overall utilization target?
It's not 0, it's 0% direct labor utilization because their salary is classified as 100% indirect expense. And yes, absolutely, their inclusion significantly pulls down the overall firm utilization number.
Okay.
That's why firms often look at two different utilization metrics. You have your technical staff utilization, which excludes most of the admin and marketing folks, and then you have firm-wide utilization.
And the exam is probably focused on the firm-wide one.
The exam tends to focus on the latter because it forces you to account for all paid labor. If a firm hires 5 new high-salary administrative staff, the firm-wide utilization will drop, and that's a signal. It signals that the direct labor needs to generate enough revenue to support a larger overall structure.
So utilization measures capacity and time management. It's really the precondition for profitability. If utilization drops, the firm just loses its ability to convert hours into revenue.
And the exam focus here is on the downstream effects. They'll test what happens to the whole system when utilization drops from, say, 65% down to 50%. The answer is always the same. Profitability gets viciously squeezed.
Why?
Because you're spreading all those fixed overhead costs, the rent, the software, over fewer and fewer revenue-generating direct labor hours.
Okay, so that's a perfect transition. We're shifting gears from managing time to managing money and the cost structure. The next metric then answers the question: how expensive is it to keep the lights on relative to the labor that actually earns us the fee? This is the support burden.
Right. And we have to immediately tackle the point of confusion here, the difference between the overhead rate and the overhead multiplier. These two terms get used interchangeably in casual conversation all the time, but they are mathematically distinct.
Yeah.
Knowing the difference is absolutely vital for the professional exam.
So let's break it down.
The first one is the overhead rate. This is a simple ratio. Indirect expense. The cost of running the firm divided by direct labor, the cost of the project staff. It tells you how many dollars of overhead are supported by every dollar spent on billable staff.
Okay. And the second one is the overhead multiplier,
Which is just 1 plus the overhead rate. Simple as that.
Let's use the dollars from the source data to make this concrete. Let's assume the firm's total indirect expense, rent, admin, software, all of it, is $900,000. And the firm's total direct labor, cost, the salaries and benefits of the project staff, is $1 million.
Okay. So the overhead rate calculation is 900K divided by 1,000K. That gives us 190.
So what does that 0.90 actually mean?
It means that for every single dollar the firm spends on product staff, it spends an additional 90 cents on the necessary support structure just to keep the lights on.
Which means the overhead multiplier is 1 plus 0.90 or 1.90.
And that 1.9, that's the cost recovery multiplier. This number reveals a fundamental truth about the business. Just to cover the cost of the project staff and the support structure, the firm has to generate $1.90 in revenue for every single dollar of direct labor it pays out.
So that's the break-even point on costs.
It's the minimum required to break even on costs, exactly. And that's before you've made a single penny of actual profit.
I want to challenge this a little bit. Is a high overhead rate always a bad thing? Say the firm's rate is 1.0 instead of 0.90. That sounds terrible on its face. But what if they're a specialized boutique firm that invests heavily in, I don't know, custom R&D and advanced parametric design software, which is all coded as indirect expense? Can a high overhead rate be justified?
That's a really sophisticated question, and the answer is yes. A higher overhead rate can be entirely justified, provided the firm's market commands a commensurately higher fee.
Which would show up in the net multiplier.
Exactly, which is reflected in the net multiplier. For a general practice firm, an overhead rate of, say, 0.90 to 1.0 is considered pretty standard. But for a boutique firm that's spending heavily on internal research, marketing, or high-tech prototyping, all indirect costs, their rate might be 1.30 or even 1.40.
And that's okay.
That's okay if their clients are willing to pay a net multiplier of 2.6 or 2.7 to cover that higher break-even point and still provide a profit. The high overhead isn't the problem. The inability to charge fees high enough to recover it is the problem.
So the key is not the number itself, but the relationship between the overhead multiplier and the revenue you're generating. And for anyone listening who's preparing for the exam, the warning is clear. Watch the wording. The rate is the ratio, like 0.90. The multiplier is the ratio plus 1, so 1.90.
That is the single greatest trap in the calculation questions on this topic. They will ask for one, and you can be sure the other one will be a very tempting distractor answer.
Okay, so we've established time efficiency with utilization and cost recovery with overhead. Now we introduce the king of metrics, the ultimate test, the net multiplier. This tells us if the firm is successfully turning its labor into revenue. The question it answers is, for every dollar of direct labor we spend, how much net operating revenue, NOR, do we successfully generate?
And the formula is simply net multiplier equals net operating revenue divided by direct labor. It's the comprehensive metric because it wraps everything up: efficient labor use, effective fee negotiation, and crucially, successful collection of that fee.
So if the firm has a net multiplier of, say, 2.50, what does that mean in simple terms?
It means for every $1 they spend on a project architect's salary, they successfully bring in $2.50 of usable revenue.
And that $2.50 has to cover three crucial things.
Exactly. The net multiplier must be high enough to cover, first, the cost of the direct labor itself. That's the $1. Second, all the overhead and direct expense are 90 cents in the previous example. And third, if there's anything left, the desired profit. That remainder is your profit margin.
And this brings us back to that sanity check. We don't even need to calculate the full net multiplier to know if a firm is failing. We only need the break-even multiplier.
That's the critical shortcut. The break-even multiplier is always 1 plus the overhead rate. So if our overhead rate is 0.90, our break-even is 1.90. This means if your actual net multiplier from your projects is 1.80, you know immediately, without doing any further math, that the firm is losing money.
Wow.
Yeah, because it's not even covering its internal cost structure.
That sounds terrifying. If I'm a junior project manager, what's the one metric I should be looking at every Friday afternoon to make sure I'm not accidentally pulling my firm underwater? Utilization seems actionable, but the net multiplier feels like the final grade.
The net multiplier is the final grade, but the utilization rate is the leading indicator.
Yeah.
But here's the key. If you have a high utilization rate, say 75%, but your project's net multiplier is low, say 1.80, when your firm needs 2.00 to break even, that tells you the project is structurally flawed.
The fee was too low.
The fee was too low, or you're writing off time like crazy. If you want to protect the firm, you look at the net multiplier on your specific project versus the firm's required break-even point. If your project multiplier is below break-even, you are subsidizing that client with the profits from other projects. And that is the moment to stop silent scope creep and issue that additional services request.
So let's talk ideal targets. If break-even is 1.9, is 2.2 the dream? What is the perfect target, or does aiming too high create other problems?
That's a great question. Most well-managed firms are going to aim for a net multiplier somewhere in the 2.20 to 2.50 range.
Why that range?
Well, if your break-even is 1.90 and you achieve a 2.20, that 30-cent difference represents profit. That's a respectable profit margin of about 14–15%. Now, aiming for something like 3.0 sounds fantastic for profitability, but it raises other questions.
Like what?
A multiplier of 3.0 often indicates one of two things. Either you're in an extremely lucrative niche market, which is great, or your firm is fundamentally understaffed and brutally utilized. And that means that massive profit is coming at the expense of staff well-being and investment in the future, like marketing or training. The perfect multiplier has to balance profitability with sustainability.
Okay, so we've established that these three numbers are all interconnected. Now we can move to the diagnostic phase. The sources provide this wonderful analogy. Reading the financial dashboard is like reading the vital signs of a patient.
That's right. And we can conduct what I call the 30-second dashboard read. You look at three things. One, utilization. Is the firm creating enough project capacity? Are people busy on the right things? Two, overhead rate. Is our support cost appropriate for the revenue we generate? Are we lean enough? And three, net multiplier. Is the firm's pricing and performance successful in converting labor into profitable NR? Are we actually making money?
And the real power comes from seeing how they interact. The diagnostic combo, or as the source calls it, the squeeze.
Yes, the squeeze. When utilization drops, the overhead rate tends to go up and the profit margin gets crushed.
Let's visualize that for a second.
Okay, imagine your firm spends $10,000 a month on software licenses. That's an indirect expense, and it's fixed. If your direct labor hours are high, that $10,000 is spread pretty thinly across a lot of billable work.
Makes sense.
But if your utilization drops because staff are idle or they're doing a bunch of indirect tasks, the direct labor cost, which is the denominator of the overhead rate, it shrinks. That fixed $10,000 cost now looks much larger relative to the direct labor. Consequently, the overhead rate rises, the break-even multiplier rises, and your profit is just squeezed out of existence. The firm has to work harder just to stand still.
This brings us directly to the KING-KAMBUF scenario, a classic case used in the source material. It was an 18-person studio working on a 45,000 square foot community health clinic. And the firm felt incredibly busy, but the cash flow was a constant worry.
A familiar story for many.
It is. So here is the tight dashboard they were looking at for the last quarter. Utilization was 54% when their target was 62%.
A big miss.
The big miss. The overhead rate was 1.05 and the net multiplier was 2.00.
Okay. So let's perform step one, the sanity test. We're going to ignore utilization for just a moment and focus on the cost structure. The overhead rate is 1.05.
Right.
Therefore, the break-even multiplier is 1 plus 1.05, which equals 2.05.
Okay, so now we compare their actual net multiplier of 2.00 to the required break-even multiplier of 2.05.
And here it is, the aha moment. They are structurally losing money. Since 2.00 is below 2.05, the firm is failing to recover its own overhead costs. This just confirms the crucial insight. You can be slammed with work and still lose money.
Wow.
I have seen principals look at a 2.00 net multiplier and genuinely smile, thinking they're in the black, right up until the moment they realize they're paying for a massive overhead structure with borrowed time. It is a gut punch.
It truly is. Yeah. So step two then is finding the leak. The utilization drop from 62% down to 54% is significant. That's an 8-point loss in capacity. What was draining all the hours into that indirect bucket at KING-KAMBUF?
The time reports revealed some major and very common problems. First, proposal effort had spiked. They aggressively pursued 2 major RFQs that were long shots and ultimately unsuccessful. All that staff time, usually very expensive senior staff time, was coded as business development indirect labor.
Okay, what else?
Second, internal QC meetings had ballooned. And this wasn't true quality control. This was high-level staff frantically fixing coordination errors late in the design development phase. It was essentially expensive rework being coded as management time.
And the third thing?
Third, PMs were being forced into production work because of poor staffing plans. It created confusing roles and made project management itself really inefficient.
But, 54% utilization is low, but it's not catastrophic. The net multiplier dropping all the way down to 2.0, that suggests something worse than just low capacity. And that brings us to the absolute critical distinction between direct labor and billable reality.
This is a professional practice killer. Your staff can code time as direct labor for Project X, which keeps their utilization looking somewhat stable, but the firm cannot actually bill for that time.
Why not?
Because the fee is fixed, or there's a negotiated cap, or it's just internal rework that you can't ethically bill a client for. So the net operating revenue doesn't go up, but the direct labor cost, the denominator of the net multiplier formula, does go up.
That is the textbook definition of silent scope creep, the biggest leak in NOR.
Absolutely. The client asked for a minor change. The project manager approved it without issuing an additional service request or an ASR. And the staff spent 40 hours executing that change. That time is coded as direct labor. The firm pays the salary, but the firm doesn't collect the revenue because the ASR was never issued. This is why the net multiplier dropped so dramatically at King-Kambuf. They had direct labor hours climbing, but their NOR was just being chipped away by write-offs and silent scope creep.
So they're paying for 1.05 in overhead, they're paying for the direct labor, but they're only bringing in 2.00 total. The loss is coming directly from that unrecovered overhead cost. So let's outline the necessary corrective actions that map back to these metrics. What is the immediate prescription for King-Kambuf?
We need a sequence that addresses these problems directly, and you have to do it in order.
Okay.
First, to raise utilization short term. The immediate goal is to free up capacity. The firm needs to freeze all low-probability proposal pursuits for at least 30 days. Just stop that drain on indirect time.
What else in the short term?
They have to actively protect construction administration time. CA is typically very high utilization work, and they can't let it get pulled back into the office to fix problems that were caused in earlier phases. And they have to enforce role definitions. Stop PMs from doing production work unless it is strictly essential. Let the skilled production staff focus on billable deliverables.
Okay, that covers utilization. What about addressing the overhead rate, which is too high at 1.05?
Right. To reduce overhead rate, medium term, this is about managing those fixed costs. They need to look at renegotiating vendor contracts, maybe bundling their software licenses to get a discount to shrink that indirect expense numerator.
That makes sense.
They should also tighten up any excessive administrative coverage, but most importantly, they need to standardize their QA/QC processes. If they stop needing those ballooning high-level meetings to fix drawings, they reduce the amount of expensive indirect rework time.
And finally, the most critical intervention, targeting the net multiplier and overall profitability.
To raise net multiplier, immediate and ongoing, this is all about revenue protection. First and foremost, they have to implement a draconian policy against silent scope creep. Any request outside the contract requires a written additional services request, period. No exceptions.
And what else?
Second, they have to ruthlessly reduce write-offs. A write-off is a direct reduction of your NOR. PMs must be held accountable for any time spent that is simply fixing internal errors. And third, they have to review and likely increase their billing rates for all staff classes to ensure they can adequately cover that required break-even multiplier of 2.05 and ideally provide the firm with a 2.0 or 2.3 as zero target.
It's a complete system failure, really, that requires management discipline, not just better accounting.
The math just exposes the discipline failure. That's all it does.
Okay, to solidify these concepts and provide a really clear comparison to the struggling King-Kambuf, let's walk through a profitable scenario. Something designed just like a comprehensive exam question. This will be our worked example walkthrough.
Great idea.
Here is the data set representing a firm that's doing well. Direct labor is $1,200,000. Indirect expense, or overhead, is $1 million. Gross revenue billed is $3 million. And the consultant invoices, the pass-throughs, are $360,000.
Okay, let's approach this systematically, just like you would on test day.
Step 1.
Step 1, calculate the overhead rate. We take indirect expense divided by direct labor. So that's $1 million divided by $1,200,000. That gives us 0.8333, which we can just call 0.83. That's a very manageable support burden.
Okay, step 2. Calculate the break-even multiplier. We just add 1 to the overhead rate. So 1 plus 0.83 equals 1.83. This is the absolute minimum recovery rate they need. Any project that doesn't yield at least 1.83 is structurally non-profitable for them.
Step 3, calculate net operating revenue, NOR, and this is where we apply that pass-through warning. We take gross revenue and we subtract all the pass-through costs. So $3 million minus the $360,000 paid to consultants, that leaves us with $2,640,000 in usable revenue.
And if a listener missed that subtraction, their NOR would be the full $3 million, which would artificially inflate their net multiplier and lead them to the wrong answer.
Exactly. Which brings us to step 4. Calculate the net multiplier. We take the NOR and divide it by the direct labor. So $2,640,000 divided by $1,200,000, which equals 2.20.
Healthy number.
Very healthy. And for the final check, step 5, calculate the operating profit. We take the NOR and subtract the total expenses, which is direct labor plus indirect expense. So the total costs are $1, $2 million plus $1, which is $2,200,000.
Okay.
We subtract that from the NOR of $2,640,000. And this leaves a healthy profit of $440,000.
And the final interpretation just confirms the financial health. The net multiplier of 2 on 20 is safely above the break-even multiplier of 1.83. This firm is managing its time, managing its costs, and pricing its services effectively.
Are doing it right.
Let's discuss a crucial ethical vignette that connects directly to the accuracy of all these numbers. This is from the KING-KAMBUF sources as well. The scenario is this. A project principal gets the quarterly dashboard and sees utilization is dangerously low, below 50%. The principal needs to hit an internal KPI of 60% utilization to get their bonus.
The bonus.
So the principal instructs the project staff, code your upcoming mandatory training time to Project X this month. The client is fixed fee, so they won't be charged, and we'll just fix the internal records later to meet our target.
This situation comes up constantly. The pressure is intense, but the standard of care response requires the staff to refuse, flat out. Misstating time, even on a fixed-fee project where the client technically isn't hurt, it corrupts the firm's financial controls at a fundamental level.
So why is it such a firm refusal? I mean, if the client isn't harmed, why can't we just fudge the internal KPI to keep the principal happy?
Because you introduce massive operational and ethical risks. Operationally, you have just destroyed your ability to diagnose your real problems. If the utilization report is wrong, management doesn't know that the firm is actually struggling with business development or has excessive administrative time. They lose the ability to correct the staffing plan.
The data becomes useless.
Utterly useless. And then ethically, two things happen. First, you're violating the duty of care to the firm by misrepresenting its financial performance, which can lead to disastrous future pricing. If Project X appears to take 50 hours longer than it actually did because you coded training time to it,
then the next time you bid a similar project,
you will grossly over-budget labor based on bad data. And second, if the firm ever undergoes an audit or if that fixed-fee client later asks for an accounting of hours spent during a dispute, you have submitted false financial data. If that time had been charged on a time and materials project, it would literally be fraud. On a fixed-fee project, it is still misrepresentation and a breach of professional integrity that could lead to disciplinary action.
So the lesson is clear. If the bonus system encourages this kind of behavior, you have to fix the incentive system or the staffing problem, not the data.
The professional standard demands accurate timekeeping. You cannot lie to the books. It's as simple as that.
Okay, let's wrap up with the tactical knowledge you need for navigating these concepts under pressure on test day.
All right. First, the scratch sheet strategy is a non-negotiable time saver. Before you even touch a calculator, immediately write down the 3 core formulas: utilization, overhead rate, and net multiplier. This just prevents memory slip-ups when you're under stress.
And let's emphasize the denominator alert. This is so crucial for distinguishing between the 3 formulas.
Absolutely. The test designers intentionally use distractors based on common denominator mix-ups. You have to distinguish between total labor, which is used only for utilization.
Only for utilization.
Then direct labor, which is used for the overhead rate and the net multiplier. And finally, net operating revenue, or NOR, which is used as the numerator for the net multiplier, but is often hidden inside gross revenue figures. If you confuse direct labor and total labor, you will arrive at one of the incorrect answers they've provided on the screen.
The fastest path to the answer is often the profitability shortcut.
This is the most efficient tactic. Whenever the overhead rate is given in a problem, say, it's 0.95, instantly compute the break-even multiplier, 1.95. Then compare that to the net multiplier you calculate in the problem. If the net multiplier is 2.9, you are profitable. If it's 1.80, you are losing money. This comparison often saves you the lengthy final step of calculating the exact dollar amount of operating profit, which is often unnecessary for the question being asked.
And our final warning, the one that ties all the way back to part 1, the pass-through warning.
Treat any mention of consultant invoices or reimbursable expenses in a problem as a flashing warning light. If consultants are mentioned, the question is almost certainly testing your understanding of the NOR definition. Remember, you have to subtract those costs from gross revenue before you calculate the net multiplier. If you fail to do this, your net multiplier will be artificially inflated, and you will wrongly conclude that a structurally struggling firm is financially healthy.
That was a tremendous deep dive into the financial backbone of an architectural firm. We've really managed to turn 3 seemingly intimidating ratios into a powerful, actionable diagnostic tool. Let's do a quick recap of key takeaways, our final pen-up summary.
4 vital definitions to carry with you. 1, utilization, direct labor divided by total labor. That's your time engine efficiency.
Right.
2, overhead rate, indirect expense divided by direct labor. That measures your support burden. 3, net multiplier, NOR divided by direct labor. It's the ultimate measure of pricing and performance.
And the 4th.
And 4, The break-even multiplier, that's 1 plus the overhead rate. It is the absolute minimum required multiplier to avoid losing money.
And the overarching lesson from the King-Kambuf case? Busy does not equal profitable. You can have high utilization and still be failing if your fees are set too low, or if silent scope creep and rework are just decimating your net operating revenue. The goal is to manage projects so accurately that every single hour coded as direct labor genuinely contributes to recovering costs and building profit.
That's the management discipline needed for survival. And this leads us to our final provocative thought for you to reflect on, building on the source material. We focus heavily on how poor utilization and scope creep can drop the net multiplier. But think about this. If a firm's utilization is fixed at a healthy 70% and their pricing is good, the initial fee multiplier is set at 2.4, but the net multiplier is still dropping steadily, say from 2.4 down to 1.90 over the course of a year. How quickly does poor collections discipline or accounts receivable leakage turn a busy, utilized, and theoretically profitable office into a functionally insolvent one?
So you're highlighting that net operating revenue is basically a phantom until the cash is physically in the bank.
Exactly. If your clients are consistently taking 120 or 150 days to pay, or if your PMs are constantly writing off build time during the collections process just to get a check in the door, that's a cash flow disaster. It means the firm is performing adequately and pricing correctly, but the entire financial model collapses due to enforcement failure. It highlights that financial management isn't just about formulas on a piece of paper. It's about rigid enforcement of collections discipline to protect that hard-earned NR in the real world. And that is the final test of practice management.
Absolutely. Go apply these formulas and start looking at the real numbers behind the facade. Until next time, stay curious and keep diving deep.